All right. Welcome back, Donald. How are you?
Good. It's nice to be back. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm well. So we last left off talking about and discussing regulatory issues and the TTB and the ABCs and all of the other letters. Let's jump in because I know you deal with a lot of distillers in your day-to-day. You work with distillers very closely, and so you're deep into the industry and what's going on with not just this pandemic, which has blown up a lot of the things that we thought were would never have a problem, and now all of a sudden we're trying to figure things out and really start from scratch with a lot of industries. So let's talk a little bit about a couple of distiller stories and kind of share, if you can, what's going on in the industry.
It's rough out there for a lot of distillers. So I work with amazing distillers. We've got over 400 distilleries who use whiskey systems, and I'm very closely connected with them. Send them emails and updates on things like TTB changes, regulatory changes, changes to tax structure, things like that. But I'm also connected with them personally. So I hear stories all the time. I hear good stories, uplifting stories, and then I also hear frustrating stories and bad stories. So, for a lot of craft distilleries, there is a light at the end of the tunnel. It's been positive. They've been able to pivot to hand sanitizer. They've been able to change their business model, keep people employed, make a little money, become a community hero, things like that. But for every good story of someone that's been able to kind of make lemonade out of the lemons, we've got distilleries that are really hurting. Some of the stories that I've seen is, if your business model is primarily foot traffic and gift shop sales and merchandise and paid tours and samplings and cocktails and bottle sales, that's all dried up. If you've got a lot of, if a lot of your business is based on craft cocktail bars or local restaurants, all of those, even for some craft distillers who have a decent retail business, when people are lined up out the door, kind of sliding a window and buying a bottle, from a front door, which is happening in many states, and hopefully that's softened now. It's hard to call out and get a new craft distillery bottle. So a lot of craft distillers are really hurting. And then those that can't keep the employees actively employed, whether, like I said, pivoting to hand sanitizer or, the furloughed or laid off employees are hit with overwhelmed unemployment systems, right? So millions of Americans are now applying for unemployment, and they're, the websites and the different agencies are just being overwhelmed. So it's different for every distillery, but there is a lot of distilleries that are really hurt right now. Now, that being said, there's a lot of distilleries that have been able to sharpen what they've got and then really make a positive as well. So it's a yin and yang, I think. Cheers.
Cheers. By the way, for those of you watching, we are having a drinking game for the next episode or two. Every time Donald says the word pivot, you at home or in your offices or wherever you're watching should take a sip. Doesn't have to be whiskey, although you get points if it is.
Extra points. Extra points if it's craft.
Absolutely. Okay, so that's a lot of doom and gloom, but it is what it is. We live in a very precarious time, as always, but now it's a little more, I think, prevalent in people's minds. So there is a lot of good that's happening in the industry. So let's talk a little bit about that. We've talked about people pivoting to hand sanitizer, and so I'm just curious, if you have some stories of distillers who have converted.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. There has been some silver lining for sure. Um, can you guess how many gallons of hand sanitizer has been made by Whiskey Systems customers just since March 1st? In how Whiskey Systems tracking it, how many gallons do you think?
Let me do some quick math.
All right.
400 plus users. Divide the one, carry the one. By pi, I'm going to say probably 1.4 million gallons, maybe
Well,
23 million bottles, 8-ounce bottles.
that's it, right on the money.
Oh,
That's right on the
there you
money.
go. That's what they pay me the big bucks for.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
1.4 million gallons of neutral spirit have been used to make hand sanitizer just inside the Whiskey Systems family since March 1. And there's different sizes. Some people are making gallon jugs. Some people are making 6-ounce bottles. But if you think about it in terms of kind of a standard 8-ounce bottle, that's 23 million 8-ounce bottles made just by the Whiskey Systems family. And the majority of those are either donated or are they're provided at below cost or at least at market rates for the local communities. So, I can't even get my head around 1.4 million gallons made just since March 1st. It's incredible. And so a lot of distilleries have been able to pivot. You know, it's hard from, all out operations and fermentation and making whiskey and making rum and making gin to pivot just so quickly, but able to do it. And certainly that's along and helped along with the TTB and the FDA, who's been able to such flexibility and guidance as well. But I do have one story. My favorite story. I've heard a lot of good stories. I've heard a lot of bad stories, but this is my favorite story heard so far. So my good friend Jason Barrett at Black Button Distillery in Rochester, New York. Let's see. I probably have here's a bottle of his apple pie moonshine. It's really good, by the way. If you're ever in Rochester, they're probably one of the best happy hours in Rochester. So New York, they shut down all the distilleries, and they quickly went and emptied out their fermenters and things like that. And then almost as soon as people got furloughed, he brought them back because they said that they could make hand sanitizer. So he went around and tried to find the glycerol and glycerin and hydrogen peroxide, and they went and hit every single house, tried to find the appropriate materials, and they went out and called their parents and called all the employees and tried to find, kind of scrounge together just enough to make like 5,000 bottles, one batch. And they were, they're being socially distant, but everyone was dedicated. They wanted to stay full employed, and they wanted to help their community. So they packed everything up, their first set, and they put it in the pickup truck, and they made a delivery. And one of the hospitals that they went to, there was a news reporter there filming a story about the hospital. And in the background, there was a bunch of guys unloading something on the truck and bringing it into the hospital. And the reporter stopped him and said, "What are you doing?" And they said, "Well, we've made hand sanitizer, we're making a donation, and we're giving it to the hospital to help them out." And so they interviewed him. The news report aired on the news that night, and the next day, Jason got 1,200 emails asking for hand sanitizer, and this is because they were in desperate need. Everyone from first responders. So then they really kicked it up into gear. They're like, "All right, this is serious now." They not only did they bring all their employees back, they hired more employees. Their shop isn't that 3,600 square feet, and it's set up to run a couple bottling lines, right? Make about 7,000 bottles a week. They were making 70,000 bottles a week in that 3,600 square feet. They had so many orders coming in. They were selling a pallet of hand sanitizer every 17 minutes. They are shipping all over the country. They shipped to Zimbabwe in Africa. And then they got a phone call from the governor of New York, who, then they were sending tractor trailer loads of hand sanitizer all over the state, all over the country. And not only has he been able to make, huge donations, hundreds of thousands of dollars in donations, have been able to cover his costs, keep everyone fully employed. And although he said works so little, wake up at early in the morning, work long until midnight, come home, sleep, repeat the process. And then the upside, of course, they're not making a lot of money, but they're seen as these incredible community heroes, to just, provide donations, provides hand sanitizer for sale, sell it at a fair price. No one's making rich on this, but he's been able to really step up and just be a hero in his community. And so when they do open back up, he's got a ton of customers for life coming back in.
Wow. That's a cool story. I don't think I managed to hit Black Button the last time I was up in New York, but next time I'll definitely stop by. So
they did a GoFundMe campaign to raise monies to get the raw materials to make the hand sanitizer, and it was a modest GoFundMe account, really just trying to cover the materials. They raised over $100,000, and they made that whole donation to the United Way, and so that the United Way then could give individuals, organizations in need, in addition to these tractor-trailer loads of sanitizer that they were making. So they've been able to. We want to talk about pivot. He said that he's made 400,000 bottles of. We're talking big bottles too. These aren't small bottles. Big bottles of hand sanitizer in just 10 weeks, and that's more bottles of liquor than he sold in 8 years. So it's a really great story. It's a funny story. Actually, just to kind of build on that, they were the facility is so small, and they didn't have enough room to hold the raw materials. You want to talk about kind of local changes and local government being flexible. It got so that they had to get tractor trailer trucks of raw materials delivered 3 times a day, and they worked with their local authorities and local authorities to get the parking laws changed, so the employees don't have to move their cars, so they can get semi trailers in and out of their distillery all day long. So not only have they been applauded from the community for those who are benefiting from the hand sanitizer, but hospitals and first responders and even local agencies, they're helping in whatever way they can so that they can help them with hand sanitizer. So yeah, it's great. They're still very, very busy, and there's no end in sight to the need for hand sanitizer. So it's been very positive for Black Button.
Yeah, definitely. And it doesn't seem like there's going to be a sudden drop off. It's not going to be the Tickle Me Elmo of the season. Super relevant reference. We're going to need hand sanitizer even more when all of these businesses start opening up, and people are going to need to sanitize and wash their hands multiple times a day. Not that they already shouldn't be, they should be, but coming from a culinary background to myself, 50, 60 times a day, it's not uncommon to wash your hands that many times and use hand sanitizer, throughout. Every time you touch something, you have to, clean. You have to you're touching people's food, you're touching, so I don't think that the need is going to go away. So that's good that several of these companies and it sounds like a majority of these craft distillers are making that pivot. So
yeah, that pivot. Yeah, cheers to that.
Yeah.
Well, kind of in that area, there's another distillery that I've worked with for many, many years, Litchfield Distillery up in Connecticut. I was talking to the owner and my friend Jack Baker, and I asked him, how's it going? How have you guys responded to this? And his quote is, it's been a wild ride, right, of good and bad. And when they started, they actually decided that they were going to shift all of their production into hand sanitizer early on. And what's really cool about their story is that one of their employees is a chemical engineer. Their head distiller is a chemical engineer. So she was able to work out the recipes. Of course, those recipes that everyone needs to follow. She's been able to source and blend and make that hand sanitizer and make sure it's perfect. But so far what they've been doing, this is a really interesting story for many craft distillers. What they do is every day they set out a tent outside of their distillery, and you come up and you kind of just take what you need. And it's kind of like, come in, a free bottle to everybody. Come in, and, when they run out, they run out. And so far, they've given away over $150,000 in bottles to their local community. And it's very taxing on their cash flow, right? It's every time that a distillery is not running their still to make bourbon for laying down, it's bourbon that in 4 years they're just not going to be able to sell. So there's an opportunity cost for craft distillers. Do you run your still and make hand sanitizer, or do you run your still and make whiskey, or do you run your still to make case goods to sell for distribution? And that opportunity cost is a balance, right? And what Jack at the Litchfield Distillery decided to do is they wanted to do as much community goodwill as they could. So they pivoted their production to hand sanitizer, and the consumer the community feedback has just been incredible. The governor came in and showed their appreciation. They're getting incredible community goodwill. They said they have over 200 handwritten letters of people's lives who they've been able to make better, and sharing their appreciation, saying they're a customer for life. And on a personal level, Jack and his brothers and the employees, they never would have thought that they were going to be interacting with first responders and healthcare workers and policemen and firemen. So for them, it's been very personally satisfying to know that these people are saving lives and they're doing whatever they can to help make their lives better. And so far they've given hundreds of gallons away to police stations and fire departments. And like I said, every day they open up and they put out what they've got, and they open the tent and people drive up, and they take what they need need to do their jobs. But one thing that we're talking about is that no good deed goes unpunished, right? So if you're a craft distillery and you're saying, hey, we've got this hand sanitizer, be prepared for people to say, I want it, and then they run out, and then they get frustrated, right? So, hey, I wanted my free sanitizer, well, we ran out, and that there's a feel of inequity or unfairness or, something like that. So, they say no good deed goes unpunished. That's something kind of a takeaway there from Jack's story is, overall it's been very positive, but certainly try for craft distillers who are going to model this, definitely set up an expectation that there is almost unlimited demand, and then there's only so much supply. So that's kind of a takeaway there. That we want to get in not only hand sanitizer but donations, and even if you're selling, there's going to be enough demand, and inevitably you're going to have to run out. So just kind of set expectations there early on with your community.
So I've actually been to Litchfield. It's a really cool distillery, and I understand, you've known them for a long time, and it's a really cool story. It's a really cool place to be if you're in the area. Definitely worth checking out. Their link, as are all of the other links to the distilleries that Donald and I have talked about today, are going to be below. So definitely click on those and go support those distilleries. Don, you have something? So
I've got a lot of Litchfield products. They're a great distillery up in Connecticut, just outside of New York. It's a fantastic community. It's a great distillery. Actually, some of the other positive things that they're doing during the pandemic is that so not only are they making sanitizer available to their distillers, but they're also they've actually given bottles of hand sanitizer to their distributors. So when the distributors are out and about, they're making those donations during their deliveries to kind of keep that relationship going and show their support to the retailers. A lot of the stores in the area are pretty loyal, so they'll have the Litchfield products up there. And of course, just like we talked about before, the curbside sales have been a really big benefit for them. And they've also been able to get into canned cocktails or late last year. So that's been a really nice thing. People can drive up, order a couple cases of their canned cocktails, which have been super popular, and then drive off. So that curbside pickup is definitely been a win for a lot of distilleries. Oh, you're muted. You're muted. Oh, there you
Yeah,
go.
sorry, there's a lot of banging outside. Somebody's delivering a
All right.
package or something. I'm not sure what. But give me 2 seconds to. Yeah, Litchfield's such a cool place, and a lot of these distilleries, they're really cool stories of people who in some cases left large corporate jobs, left the legal profession, left the medical profession. The craft distillery industry is the heart of small business and one of the hearts of small business in this country. The fact that they are spending so much time and energy and effort I'm just going to say it, they're saving lives by producing all this hand sanitizer and in some cases at a loss to give back to their communities, to make sure that the people in those communities have the resources that they need because they're just not available elsewhere, or there's politics involved. But so now's the time to, I know we're all struggling, but now's the time to start figuring out who you're going to support and go when you have the time, when you have the chance, when you can go out and when they're open, go and support them. Join their bar club, join their their spirits club, buy a bottle, more than you normally would. I'm not saying drink more than you normally would, but so it's time to support local because they support you.
Absolutely. And distilleries like Litchfield, they're not very big, but they've got a very loyal following, and this is and then them being such an advocate for their community, nurses and hospital and frontline healthcare workers, they can barely get their own hand sanitizer to keep them. They're trying to save lives and they don't have their own PPE. So distilleries making the donations to the local hospitals not only are so incredibly well received, but it's your community, right? And so you don't know if you're going to need you may be the beneficiary of some of these hand sanitizer as well. So craft distilleries across the country, it's giving the community, it's keeping everyone fully employed, making that goodwill. But yeah, so small and big. And there's actually a large distillery in Gatlinburg, Tennessee, who are friends of mine, and I've worked with them for many, many years. The Shine brand, Old Smoky. Now they're ginormous, but think about this. Talk about pivoting. Last 4.5 million visitors came to their 4 distilleries. 4.5. So they went from 4.5 million to 0 because everything got shut down. All 4 distilleries closed in March, and then of course they moved all of their business, their retail business, and everything into either running inventory, building inventory for wholesale business. But imagine that sort of pivot. You've got all this infrastructure set up for tourism business, and it just totally dries up. So they've been able to pivot their employees, and then so normally yesterday you're serving samples at the bar, and now you're filling bottles and making hand sanitizer. So even a large distiller like that has been able to quickly pivot and pick up the hand sanitizer. And so they've been taking advantage of the time there, build up inventory, build up their distribution inventory, and then so eventually, they're trying to keep everyone fully employed so that when things open back up slowly, they have the inventory, they have the distribution, they can safely open up and do tastings again. And what's really cool about Old Smoky is that they've been able to actually increase the rate of pay, right? So they've been able to pay frontline employees some hazard pay, which is really nice. So, they realize that all these employees, and there's a risk associated with that. So I've heard a lot of stories of distilleries really stepping up their game and trying to be as generous as possible to recognize that there's risk with coming to work, and they're trying to mediate that risk as much as they can. Some of the other kind of nuggets that I think craft distillers can take away from this is that Old Smoky is doing local concerts, and they're streaming those online so people can watch. They're engaging with bartenders to do like online tasting and cocktails. So not only are they kind of building that goodwill with the bartenders and on-premise accounts that aren't really doing anything, but they're working with them to, continue to keep them active, and hopefully people can make Old Smoky or craft cocktails at home using these sort of online bar demonstrations. And then of course they're anticipating the need to make a safe space for people coming back in, because eventually we're going to open back up, and we still don't have a vaccine, and the infection rate is, it is what it is. So they've been investing in ways to how do they have not only a safe environment for their employees, but for the guests coming back in. And so it's kind of like, are been able to be community heroes, and even large distilleries are been able to pivot and kind of take advantage of everything that they can to build that goodwill, keep their fans engaged, and yet at the same time, get ready for when it opens back up.
Absolutely. There is a silver lining in all of this, and that is we as a nation, we as a people, as humanity have definitely come together closer. Maybe not physically, but we definitely all, I think, at this point understand how important all of us are, and how important individuals, just how important everything is. To hold on.
What were we talking about?
So yeah, I just wanted to kind of point out that it's these stories are, they're heartwarming, and they show us how important it is to support each other in this time. It's important to do it even when we're not in a global pandemic and
For sure.
rioting in the streets. So it's important that we spend the time to learn about each other and spend time with people that we like to spend time with. And it's important that we support each other. It's important that we go out and we support small business. I know it's easy. I know we're all guilty of supporting the large corporations of the world because things are cheaper, but we have to have that discussion at some point where we can just understand the needs of our communities. So
yeah, and that's a great segue into some friends of mine up in Butte, Montana, Headframe Spirits. I was talking to my friend Courtney McKee, who they make a Orphan Girl cream liqueur. They make a lot of great products, but man, this stuff is amazing. It's like a bourbon cream liqueur. Oh man, it's excellent. Actually, is it bourbon as the base? Yeah, bourbon cream liqueur.
Yeah.
So I was talking to Courtney, kind of saying, what are you guys doing? And to that point, you talk about helping each other out. At the end of the day, this is all unknown to us. We've never been in a time like this. We don't have a plan. We don't have experience with this. And Courtney's big message was, we don't know exactly what to do. So when in doubt, kind of go back to their company core values. And their company core values are, we help our employees and we help our community. And that is, it takes the highest priority over any sort of profits. So, back in March, back at mid-March, they had to make a decision. They didn't know what was going to happen. They didn't quite have direction from their state yet. Everyone was kind of still in the unknown, and they decided, it's not clear what to do. And they thought about it. And they said, what is the best thing we could do for our community and for our employees? And they decided independently to shut down. And so, again, they kind of went back to their core values, and they said, all right, what is the right thing to do? Now, this was 2 days before St. Patrick's Day, which is the biggest event of the year for bars and restaurants. And so they said, all right, what are we going to do? What's the right decision to make? And they decided to shut down. And then a day later, so a day before St. Patrick's Day, the rest of the community, they decided, they mandated everyone shut down, close all the bars and restaurants. And so Headframe was really a leader in that decision. But the idea is, what can they do to safely help their communities and their employees? And so and what that meant was, how do they set up a safe space for their employees? And then they pivoted into hand sanitizer. After they made the decision to close down the tasting room, close down their bar, and then they decided, well, okay, let's, how do we make this work? How do we take a bartender and put them in there? And what they found was this incredible synergy. Teams that had never really worked together. The bartender is making hand sanitizer, or working right next to their welders and their the maintenance team, and everyone's working together, and they were able to bond over this, not only helping the community, but working with each other in a way that they've never done before. So the teams are stronger, and of course they had to quarantine too. So it's like they came to work in a safe space. And then, what's really good is that one thing that Headframe did very well is they said, listen, you're normally paid on tips. And so now not only did they have to increase everyone's wage, so employees are not only fully employed, but they're getting more hours than they did before, or wages they did before. And one thing that all distillers should do, if they haven't, it may be too late now at this point, but they applied and got a PPP loan from the SBA, the Small Business Association. So that's been fantastic for them. They've been able to use that money to keep everyone employed, raise wages, and so that's been really good. So one of the takeaways here for craft distillers who are watching is, when you're in this sort of dark time, go back to your company values, and maybe even reevaluate the values, right? Employee safety, community advocacy, helping those around you. Hopefully those are higher priorities than profits. And Headframe is, hopefully they've got all their costs covered. They've been able to sell hand sanitizer. They've been able to make a lot of donations. They've been able to keep everyone employed. And their teams are stronger than ever. So now when they're going, and this is super important as well, now they're starting to reopen. And Courtney gave me this analogy. I think it's great. When you're reopening and you're kind of turning the dial back up, you only want to go in one direction, right? You don't want to crank the volume up too quickly and then have to turn it back down. So what they're doing is they're meeting the customer where the customer feels comfortable. So making cocktails to go, prepping a 750 ml bottle with cocktail and garnish, and they can buy a bottle. So if that's where the customer wants to get it, great, perfect. If you want to come into the tasting room, a dedicated area. One person is making the cocktails and another person is interacting with the customer, and they're trying to get that division of labor. And one thing that's great about Headframe is that they document all of their procedures. So that's something that craft distillery should do as well. What is your process? What does it look like? Document that standard operating procedure, those SOPs, to make sure that everybody understands what you're doing to provide a safe space, and also to make sure that everyone understands what they're going to do. Because nobody wants to create a COVID hotspot. Nobody wants to put their employees at risk. Nobody wants to put their customers at risk. And so documenting that, documenting it, and then of course, meet your customers where you want to go. So they're slowly opening back up, and they're really kind of turning that dial. Another good takeaway, a bit of advice, is that as we're opening back up, Headframe made the decision, the conscious decision, to not be an immediate competitor to bars and restaurants down the street. Let them kind of open up, let them kind of get some of that demand, everyone kind of rushing in, and then kind of open up over time. So not only was that so well received by the bars and the restaurants, who couldn't make hand sanitizer, right, and couldn't sell those things. They're doing what they can to help recognize and support their community. They really, like I said, they really focused on their values and made the decision to do the best thing for them, for their employees.
So it's easy for governments and large organizations to track how much these things cost. If I'm a small distiller, if I'm Headframe Spirits, how do I track what I'm spending, and how do I figure out exactly how much is going out the door when I'm giving away all this hand sanitizer? So
Yeah, that's very important for craft distillers. So not only is a TTB say you got to record everything, so you got to keep records of everything. It's super important that if you're making these donations and building that goodwill, that you really got to understand how much it's costing you. What does that opportunity cost? Are you spending 80, 90, 100,000 on neutral spirits, on glycerin, on hydrogen peroxide, on bottles? You're going out there and making these small labels. All of these little expenses add up so quickly. And that's one good thing about whiskey systems, is that you can put in the packaging costs, and you can put in all of your spirit costs, and you know kind of what it's costing you to make these donations. And next year, when your accountant says, how much did you spend on making all this hand sanitizer and giving all these donations, it's great, and you get all, but how much did it cost you? And if you don't have a good idea, $20,000-$30,000 can become $100,000 in cash spent very, very quickly. So hand sanitizer is great. You got to track it. Use a system like Whiskey Systems or whatever you're doing to track those costs. Stay in compliance with TTB reporting. Make sure that you're doing things above board, and then don't forget that these donations cost money. Keeping your employees employed costs money. And if you're in a position where you can eat that cost and eat that cash flow, that's amazing. That's great. Take advantage of the PPP loan. Take advantage of the small business loans. But just make sure that you've got a good record of what you're doing, how much it's costing you. Know what your cost of goods are. Can you sell a big bottle of hand sanitizer for $10? Maybe you can. Maybe you're breaking even, or maybe you're losing money. So it's super important that you have an idea about what those costs are. And that's just kind of like business 101. But I was talking to one person who's made $150,000 in donations, and that's just their cost. That's just their raw material cost. I said, well, what about labor and all that kind of stuff? And he's like, oh, well, should I include that? And I said, yes, it's cash that you're paying. So just whatever system you're using, make sure you're documenting. Make sure you keep an idea on the cost, and so you'll be ready for next year when they say, hey, what did you do last March and April and May for all those hand sanitizer donations? How much did that cost you? So just kind of keep track of all that so you don't get blindsided next year.
Absolutely. Fantastic advice from Donald Snyder. Don, I appreciate you coming on again. I'm looking forward to continuing these discussions and better understanding the industry. And just for those of you out there, just keep in mind you can click on all the links below, and stay safe, wash your hands, stay indoors when you can, and cheers to all of you.
Cheers, Justin. Thank you so much for having me on. It's been a great talking to you. And remember, support your craft distilleries. And if you're a craft distillery, support your communities and your employees in the best way that you can. Cheers.